please welcome Robert Lee.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. So my name is Robert Lee. I'm the CEO and co-founder over at Dragos. We're a technology and services company focused on the industrial world. So that's what my talk is about, industrial world, and what we have in our community, and really looking at the different challenges that we face when we talk about the different types of industrial infrastructures. My talk is going to be going into not only the cyber threats that we saw last year specifically to industrial, but also the lessons we learned in incident response cases, things about new vulnerabilities, lessons learned that hopefully will help you guide your investments, your resources, your effort and time in this next year. Because going after industrial security and doing it well is worth doing. And when we look at that industrial world, what I want to highlight is it's not what we typically think it is. I see a lot of folks who think utilities and oil and gas. And those are really, really important parts of our industrial infrastructure, but it really is everything. Building automation systems in data centers, rail, water, everything around us has some element of physics with it, and that's really what we're talking about, is all that IT stuff plus the physics of what we're working with. But with our industrial world, we do have some unique challenges. So I want to bring us all up to speed right before we get into all the actual key points of the talk. So when we start out, and we wanted to look at the industrial world, I want to start off with a little story we used to tell people on the intelligence side of the house. So when I first started my career, started over in the Air Force, but spent most of my time at the National Security Agency working on and looking at industrial threats, targeting industrial control systems, or ICS, or operations technology, not IoT. I see a couple of you doing that. We're like, oh, it's all IoT. Stop saying that. The moment we're comparing Alexa to a gas turbine, we're all going to die. All right, it is different infrastructure. But when we look at that old Intel story, it was this idea of a man underneath a light looking for his car keys. Pitch black everywhere, light shining down brightly on him, looking and looking and looking for his car keys. And a police officer walks up and says, how can I help you? He says, well, I'm looking for my car keys. So the police officer starts looking around, helping him. 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, starting to get really frustrated. Police officer says, well, where did you lose your keys? The guy said, well, in the alley over there. It's like, well, why are we looking here? It's like, well, this is where I can see. And that, in of itself, is a problem for a lot of security, but it's especially potent in industrial security. When we think about the industrial threats over the years, we hear all these stories pop up, where it's like, oh, well, it was just one thing over here, or there's not a lot of industrial threats, and there's not a lot of different challenges we're dealing with. But then you ask companies, so what are you doing in your industrial environments? Oh, well, nothing. Well, how would you see it then? In a lot of ways, we effectively have Schrodinger's ICS around the world. We're not looking inside the box to see that everything's going well. And the challenge for a lot of our organizations is that our infrastructure is changing. And we hear a lot of different words get thrown out, Industry 4.0, digital transformation, whatever terms you want to use. I'd caution against IT-OT convergence. I see a lot of that. We're like, IT-OT convergence. Well, actually, that happened like a decade ago. We already have Windows systems in industrial environments. That's not the convergence that's taking place. Largely, the convergence now is around culture and figuring out how to get ahead of it. But our infrastructure is becoming hyper-connected, and we're seeing more homogeneous infrastructure. So instead of a substation in one part of the country being completely different than a substation in another part of the country, we are going more towards common operating platforms. And that is increasing the ability for adversaries to get scale in what they do. So at the same time that we're becoming hyper-connected and starting to have more common infrastructure, we are also seeing threats that are learning from each other. And I'll be able to talk about that today as well. But in our industrial world, the security has to be different. So one of the things I see a lot of organizations make mistakes on is they effectively copy and paste their IT security controls into their operations environment. Effectively, whatever doesn't break the SCADA system, they feel comfortable bringing over. But that's not actually how you reduce risk. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right control. When we look at operations, technology, security, a lot of the things that you would be right-minded to walk into an organization and recommend don't really give you the same level of value. A great example is antivirus. Not saying that antivirus is bad, but when you go into an operations environment, maybe a distributed control system at a plant, like a refinery, You look and there's the nice little icon running of the antivirus, and you're like, feels good. But then you open it up and you realize that according to the vendor warranty, they had to exclude all the files and folder paths on that system. So the light is on, the icon is blinking, but it's literally doing nothing on that system. And the reality isn't that everybody's jerks about this, is that software was created with IT threats in mind. So some of the stuff we do in operations ends up looking like an IT threat. And if you just ran the antivirus in that way, you would absolutely bring the plant down. I have responded to more attacks on infrastructure that have led to outages by IT than I have ever dealt with Russia, China, and Iran combined, okay? So we do have to be careful in how we approach this. Even things like vulnerability patching. If you walked in and said, we're gonna address our vulnerabilities, nobody in their right mind would tell you not to patch. I'll be the guy. You necessarily don't want to go around patching all your infrastructure. We know it from a risk perspective of the challenges that can be in terms of operations and patching high availability equipment. But there's actually another reason to it. It's the fact that a significant portion of the vulnerabilities are meaningless. There's a lot of vulnerabilities that people have found on industrial equipment that sound good, that aren't weaponizable or usable by adversaries to do anything that's harmful. We found that well over half of the industrial vulnerabilities released were useless. All right, so we went through and reverse engineered and looked at every single one of the vulnerabilities and found that more than half of them added absolutely zero risk compared to what was already natively available on the system in the first place. So again, it's not don't patch. I can already see the RSA hashtags now as like the operations people go to IT and said, Rob Lee said don't patch. No, that's not the takeaway. But patch wisely, figure out which ones actually introduce risk. And to do that, it's not going to be based on a CVS. It's not going to be based on a score. It's going to be based on getting to know your operations. It's going to be based on getting to know your people and understanding what the mission really is. And our threats are ultimately different as well. That's why we have to take a different focus on security. Why does OT security need to be treated differently? Different mission, different systems, different purpose that we're actually trying to achieve, and different threats. So if we got all these different things, then we shouldn't assume the security controls are going to be the same. Years ago, the late Mike Asante and I wrote a paper titled The ICS Cyber Kill Chain. And all we were trying to say is all of the steps and things that you think about in an enterprise or IT network, those are important, but it's just stage one of causing an attack in an industrial environment. If you really want to go forward and cause an attack that's going to manipulate the physical process or have some sort of actual known impact, not just spraying Nmap in the environment and hoping that something happens, but actually doing a high confidence attack, you're going to have to understand the physics of that system, the engineering of it, the understanding of everything outside of just the IT stuff. So a lot of the stage one that we track or think about is only if we see them going after the types of systems like data historians or human-machine interfaces or engineering documents, the type of stuff that is going to be useful for building a stage two. And we start thinking about that stage two, it also brings me a lot of confidence. Because I always hear how industrial security is so far behind and how we're so screwed. Like we as a Defender community, it's therapy sometime. We start going, oh my gosh, the adversary has the upper hand all the time and we're never going to get this right. Well, from a kill chain perspective, I love it because it actually shows that in industrial environments, there's more steps that an adversary has to achieve to do the types of things that we care about most. And that gives us an opportunity and time to think about how we're going to analyze and work through that to make sure that we keep the lights on, that we keep the refinery active, that we keep our manufacturing secure. So we can do it. But there are some scary cases. So I want to go over one and highlight one that happened in 2017 as we lead into this talk about the year in review for 2019. Some of you might be familiar with this. Unfortunately, quite a bit of the information that's public about it is incorrect. There's a lot of folks who wanted to talk about the incident without having any familiarity with the threat or the incident, so it drove a lot of misreporting. It wasn't the journalist doing a bad mistake. It was our own community maybe talking a little bit active. But back in 2017, at a petrochemical facility that was not Saudi Aramco, that was actually one of the big things that ran. It was like, Saudi Aramco is attacked by Iran. Both those statements are incorrect. But there was a petrochemical facility in Saudi Arabia that was attacked. But actually, it was compromised back in 2014. And in 2014, the adversary, we track him as an adversary called Xenotime, but the adversary broke into that facility, bypassed the SMS-based two-factor that they were using, went straight through the enterprise networks, blew through the IT security controls they were doing, and went directly for the plants. They didn't stop, they didn't do anything else, they went directly for the safety system and the engineering workstation around that. So when we think about different types of industrial equipment, we do have, in many environments, a type of system called an SIS, or Safety Instrumented System. It is a purpose-built system specifically implemented and integrated into that physical process, so it's very, very unique, that its only purpose in life is to prevent death at that facility. Not protect the equipment, that'd be protection systems, not to keep the plant running if something goes wrong. Its only actual purpose is that if everything else is going wrong, it can shut down the plant in such a way that people don't die. That's it. And this adversary beelined right for it. The adversary ended up identifying what the system was, figuring out what they could about it, and then left for a little over 2 years. It's our assessment that in that time they were going and they had to eventually acquired a physical copy and a physical access to a range or environment that had that type of equipment, and they went and developed a capability known as Trisis, and they came back in 2017 and they deployed it against this petrochemical facility. It was the first time ever that we had a cyber attack intentionally designed to kill people. Luckily, the adversary messed up. It wasn't because the system was so resilient or the security of the safety system was so awesome. That's not what happened. What happened is your adversaries are human too. And they made a coding error, a small coding error, that ended up tripping the safety system or bringing it down, but didn't have the intended effect of removing the logic and keeping it up while you could do an attack on the environment that would harm people. The operators and engineers saw that, said, hey, their safety system tripped. So let's call the vendor, let's figure this out. And as they were all talking, they came to the conclusion, well, maybe it's just a maintenance issue. Getting root cause analysis of really understanding what goes wrong in our environments is as important as detection, because it's going to guide the way that we interact, and it's going to guide the way and who gets brought into the case. Engineering determined that it was just a maintenance thing. Advised by the vendor, IT security folks eventually got involved. The IT security folks with the wrong training, wrong tooling, looked at it and said, I don't think anything's happening. And they went back into production. So the adversary got a second chance. We definitely don't want the adversaries to have a second chance. But they came back, they found out the error, one of the errors in the software, the Trisis software they deployed. They patched it, redeployed it, and it failed. See, patching doesn't even work for the adversaries. No, but so they ended up patching the safety system, the safety system malware, but they patched the wrong thing. So it's still, as humans, as people, they still messed up on their own malicious software. So they caused the safety system to trip again. This time, the engineering folks at that company said something is obviously wrong, and we're getting bad advice from everybody else. So they ended up having 2 responders, I think a couple other people got involved as well from the company, ended up coming and helping them. Unlike what was reported, that wasn't incident response firms. That was Saudi Aramco. It was actually Saudi Aramco wasn't the victim, they were the incident responders. So Julian and Nasser and some folks over there ended up going to the plants, helping out their neighbors and their community. And after the fact, firms like mine and FireEye and others got involved, analyzed what we could, talk about the threat, help tell the bigger picture. But a lot of credit goes not to the people here, but to the folks there that actually did it in their community. And that's something powerful, too, about our industrial world, is taking care of our community. It's our infrastructure. There's something personal about that we should all be excited about. But we're dealing with threats that are actually getting more aggressive and are actually going after and harming people. This isn't just about intellectual property theft, though that is important, too, and more likely to be in your manufacturing lines than your email server. But we're talking about safety and environmental impacts and things that matter to our communities. So that's a scary-ish kind of story, so I always have this right after the fact, almost as like eye therapy afterwards, being like, defense is doable, all right? So we're talking about some bad things, we're talking about some things we saw this past year, but what I want everybody to remember is our infrastructure is way better than people give it credit for. I always see somebody on social media go find a vulnerability or be able to phish an email, exchange server or something and a power utility, and they go, aha, you can bring down the grid. All right, there is not one grid. All right, let's get that through our minds. And also, we have highly, highly safe and reliable infrastructure. It's not because things are so bad today that we're doing security. It's because the threats are getting really aggressive and more numerous, and our industry is changing. Going back to that second slide that I showed. The understanding is we're trying to get ahead of this issue because we want to maintain the safe and reliable operations that we see around the community and have visibility into what the problem is. But it's not worth running out going, oh my gosh, these folks are doing so many bad things. Actually, our asset owners do way more than they publicize because they don't want to tell people what their actual defenses are. So we do need to have a little bit of credit for what they're actually doing in these environments. So for the rest of the talk, what I'm going to talk about is our year-end review reports and all the different insights that we have from them. These just launched. We do them every year just as a thing to give to the community. It's got one of those capture banners, and you can click skip. All right, so I don't need your emails. Just go read reports and actually understand what we're seeing. For years, we've talked in abstract about threats and vulnerabilities and similar. So this was our contribution to say, well, here's the actual data. It was inspired by like the M-Trends reports. It was inspired by the Verizon DBIR reports. A lot of good companies going out doing cool things to give out information. So we wanted to add the ICS or OT flavor to it and say, here's what we're actually seeing. So let's take it first up. We'll start talking about vulnerabilities. When we looked at the vulnerabilities, we had great folks on our team, Reed and Kate and others, take a look at every single industrial vulnerability that was released over the past year. Usually there's about 400 to 500 any given year. And they are directly related to how much people are looking. Any given year, we might see a spike of like 700 because there was a conference and somebody wanted to look more at the vulnerabilities, which is not great. And all the places that I feel super excited, I'm like, yeah, we can do this. The vulnerability side of ICS is something like the 1990s. Like that is an area that's got to improve. So there's a lot more vulnerabilities than we even look for. But when we look at the data about the vulnerabilities, we can come up with some interesting findings. So I'm going to go through the metrics, and we'll talk about a takeaway from it. So the first up is that 24% of those vulnerabilities were related to the ICS protocols themselves. 74% were network exploitable, and 76% were deep within the ICS. So what does all that mean? It largely means that we've got a nice, crunchy exterior, and then once you get inside, bets are off. It means that we've spent a lot of time as a community focusing on not only the protection equipment that we're using or segmentation, but also on the security of edge devices. And when we start looking at it, the internal is a little soft and gooey. A lot of these systems are insecure by design. They are systems that if you had access to them, you don't need a vulnerability. Going back to that stat earlier where I said more than 50% are useless. We'll see vulnerabilities like, hey, if you have this vulnerability and you exploit this PLC, you'll be able to change its logic. Like, okay, or I could just sit on the engineering workstation and change its logic. Like, there's no authentication or anything to stop me from doing that. So why would I waste a vulnerability or exploit on that? So those are the kind of challenges that we largely face. And knowing that a lot of them are network exploitable and that they're in the network protocols themselves, the hyper-focus on endpoint security that does help in the enterprises generally isn't the only way to approach things in ICS, especially since we have a lot of devices that aren't capable of having an endpoint. And even if they did, it's more about the native functionality of that equipment. So when you are going out and looking at your industrial environments or advising people looking at industrial environments, it's a really important takeaway to talk about what you can do in that environment, not at a system level, but as a system of systems level. That's more akin to what we can do in ICS security and what we've got to focus on. When we further looked at the vulnerabilities, we found that 55% of them had a patch, but no alternative mechanism to do security. So the reliability on the vendor was patch it or don't, but that's all you get. And when we went through the vulnerabilities, we found that there were really simple recommendations that could have been made that would have made the vulnerability not exploitable. But our community is in this habit of patch or don't, patch or don't, patch or don't, not what's the compensating controls. And in the world of industrial security, we should always be thinking about what are the compensating controls that we can put in place to actually maintain security, especially if we can't patch it at any given time. But if you did trust the patches, turns out 26% of them contained significant errors. More than that had errors, but 26% had significant errors. Wrong patch, wrong vulnerability, wrong process, wrong device sometimes, or completely misstating the actual scoring mechanism of the vulnerability itself. That's not great. Further, 26% didn't even have a patch. It was like, here's a vulnerability, have fun, community, No patch, no security mechanism to mitigate it, just wanted to let you know that you're screwed. Like, thanks, guys. When we look at these metrics, what they help show, again, is a story around the difficulty with just focusing on vulnerabilities. How many attacks have we seen that have taken advantage of successfully exploited vulnerabilities in ICS? 0. Now, if you're talking about ransomware type stuff and you're seeing Windows devices, that's fine. But actually in the control elements themselves, PLCs, RTUs, safety systems, engineer workstations, et cetera, we don't see vulnerabilities being exploited. Now, it's fair to say that eventually we might if we do the right security with everything else, so we don't want to just ignore vulnerabilities. But the attacks we're seeing, the things that are happening, are using the native functionality of that equipment. If I can open the circuit breaker as an operator, I can open the circuit breaker as an adversary. And we can't just say, well, we should just put authentication across everything. No, because I don't want my operator not to be able to operate the equipment, especially in a safety consideration. Turns out security is hard, go figure, and it's really incumbent upon us to understand the mission of what we're doing. One of the major failures outside of the metrics that I see for teams is when they go into these plants and these organizations, and they say, here's what we're going to do for security. Instead of stepping back and realizing we're digital janitors, so we're supposed to be there to say, hey, what do you actually need? What are you trying to do? What's the business value? How can we help you? Let's figure out how to make this fit for you. I remember walking into an environment that didn't have cameras. It wasn't like internet connected up or anything, and they had a sticky note on the HMI with a password. And I asked the operator about it, jokingly. I was like, did anybody ever give you crap for this? He's like, every single IT guy. Like, all right. And to him, it was a hassle that everybody always came and asked him about the password on the sticky note. And I bet most of you would probably do the same, except there's no cameras, there's no understanding of it. I would argue that until the Russians are paratrooping into that station, like, he's all right. We're training more to pen testers at times than we are to adversaries. And I'm not saying have sticky notes across your ICS with passwords. Again, please be careful on the takeaways from this talk. What I'm saying, though, is let's figure out what these folks are trying to do and make sure that we're building the actual right security for what they need. Because there are quite a few threats out there. So if I was standing on this stage 5 years ago, we'd be talking about 1 or 2 threats. Historically, we've only ever talked about 1 or 2 at a time because we've only seen 1 or 2 at a time. And any new one was giant news and reports coming out. I was like, wow, there's a new adversary that's phishing the utility sector. We're like, yeah, okay. But now, as we started looking, as we started diving deeper, as we started getting visibility into those industrial environments, we're able to say that there's 11 different adversaries, 11 different state actors, and I would say they are exclusively state at this time, that are going after these industrial environments. And it's not onesies and twosies. It's hundreds of victims that they're going after. And this past year, we added 2 new threats. When we look at the year in review piece, there was 2 new activity groups that we track. I stay out of the attribution game. For those of you that like attribution, that's fine. I don't find the value in it for my customers personally, so we don't focus on it. I feel it's highly biased. But what I do care about is it targeting me? So is it relevant to me? And what do I understand about it so I can use it? Actually, when we think about Intel, we usually try to measure it with CART: complete, accurate, relevant, and timely. Is it complete enough for me to make a decision, accurate enough for me to make a right decision, relevant enough to me that I actually care about it, and timely enough that I can use it in a mechanism that helps my organization? And when we do that, we talk about activity groups, clusters of intrusions, to pull them together to say, here's how they're targeting, here's what they're targeting, here's where they're going. And we look at that, we added Parasite and Wassenite. I have to really hate my Intel team sometimes when they come up with Wassenite, Wassily Rabbit. Anyways, Wassenite. And no, Parasite's not misspelled. We use industrial minerals. Parasite's a type of industrial mineral. This is now a science discussion, and you're welcome for being educated at RSA about industrial minerals. So Parasite and Wassenite ended up being 2 threats that were going after industrial organizations. Parasite was using the VPN vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities in edge devices right after they got released. So we saw some vulnerabilities that were released for VPNs and firewalls and remote connectivity equipment. And the very next day, they started hitting those one-day type vulnerabilities, going after these plants and operations. Obviously, they're not going to be patching that quickly, especially those edge devices. And so the adversary got to take advantage of it. What we found was interesting is it was pretty far and wide. They were going after not just targets here in the US, but also in the Middle East and Australia, and they started going after not only electric and oil and gas, but also aerospace. And they're immediately using those vulnerabilities to get access. And that's that stage 1 stuff. That's not where we freak out. That's not where we say, oh my gosh, we're all going to die. That's where we talk about an adversary getting access to industrial operations, and now we want to know, what are they doing? What are they interested in? What are they taking? How are they doing it? So a lot of our time and focus was, after you get exploited, after they get access to the industrial environment, how are they moving around? What does their lateral movement look like? How are they achieving their operations? And a lot of it was taking advantage of living on the land techniques and common tools and open source tools. Same thing with Wassenite. Wassenite ended up going more after the enterprise IT networks, but then pivoting immediately into, or trying to get access to, the industrial side of the house and the industrial networks. They were using common things like Mimikatz and everything else to do that. But what was incredibly interesting to us about this adversary is they were very targeted. When they were going after targets like a nuclear company that they went after, they were hard coding in their internal IP ranges into the propagation and ability to move around the environment. Meaning it wasn't some drive-by and we get access, it's we know who you are and we know enough about your environment to start hard coding those RFC 1918 addresses into the malware. Again, fairly sophisticated in terms of operations, not necessarily in terms of malware. So a lot of the most sophisticated adversaries we track are using the bare minimum and basics of tooling and capabilities, which is really smart actually, but they're very targeted and understand that industrial side of the house and how to move around within it. And probably the most interesting observation we had about the threats is that they're learning from each other, and there's quite a bit of proliferation into other industries. Another thing that I see that is something that we need to work on is we bifurcate and silo too much into our different industries. We say, well, that's an electric threat, and I'm in the mining sector, so I don't care about it. Or that's an oil and gas threat, and I'm in the rail sector, so whatever. I would challenge you to think about those threats that are industrial focused, and if you are dealing with industrial networks, try to learn from those limited case studies we have. There's only 11 threats we're tracking right now that do this. Because those threats very quickly have been showing, time and time again, the ability to move into other sectors. And sometimes it's the fact that they've been there all along, but going back to that visibility challenge with a spotlight over the guy looking for his keys, we aren't looking for them. I remember a campaign that launched in 2013 and 2014 that the vendor said, this is focused on the electric industry. It's electric, focus on electric. And I saw it popping up in petrochemical and mining places. So we went to them and said, I don't think it's just electric. No, it's just electric. And when we finally unraveled it, what we realized is all of their customers were electric companies. They didn't have mining and petrochemical companies. So all the telemetry and insight they were getting was saying electric. But because they didn't have any other customers, they didn't know it was actually quite further reaching. So what I'd advise for all of you is when you read these reports about industrial threats, use the language at least. Hey, it's at least in electric, or it's at least in mining. It's not a reason to ignore it because you don't see MineStar popping up for autonomous vehicles. So we try to want to get ahead of this. We don't want to just focus and over-focus on things like technical indicators. It's not that indicators are bad, but we all know that indicators aren't really transposable and they're not highly durable. You've probably seen the enterprise MITRE ATT&CK over the past couple years. That's really, really cool. The community is going much more towards a tradecraft aspect or an adversary behaviors or TTPs or however you want to call it. And so this past year, we contributed our insights over to MITRE and said, hey, you guys are working on this. You guys and gals are getting on it. Here's our insights. Have fun. Let's collaborate and just get this out to the community. So it's launched, freely available, out there for everybody. I'm going to encourage you to go take a look at it if you're in one of these organizations that have operations or industrial technologies. That framework now provides you an ability to easily talk about and communicate about what you're actually trying to protect, detect, and respond to, and it does it in such a way that you can talk to other organizations with a common lexicon. That's pretty powerful. Please don't get in the habit of doing the bingo card thing, goes, I wrote one detection, it's green. No. Try to have a more defensible position, but it's absolutely something that you all should be able to go and use. As an example, we could take any given activity group that we track, and I don't need you to worry too much about what the words on the screen are, but we take any different activity group we track, like Electrum, which was responsible for the Ukraine 2016 electric power outage, and overlay what their actual kill chain was across the different steps and techniques and tactics in MITRE ATT&CK for ICS, and this can give you an immediate playbook of sorts of here's exactly what I need to be prepared for. Because another challenge that I see is folks think that there are novel attacks. There aren't novel attacks. There's a step in that chain of events that's novel, but all the other steps aren't novel. And you don't need to detect or protect against everything. You need to be able to detect or protect against some things and then be able to pivot the investigation. It's not about, can I get an alert, or can I block something at the firewall? It's, can I tell the story of what the adversary is trying to do and get ahead of it? Just because they breach the firewall doesn't mean they're successful. They got all that stage 2 stuff to do. We've got time and opportunity to do it. The other piece of this, of course, is just telling you what the actual big ones from last year were. So your mileage may vary depending on your organization, but these are the ones, and they'll be available, of course, on the slides afterwards for you, that as you go and look into industrial security over this next year, these are the ones that we see popping up time and time again. We mapped them into the different activity groups we've seen. We said these are the techniques and tactics that you should be paying attention to. And these can offer you up good use cases or stories to be able to tell inside your security to say, can we detect this, and can we detect it reliably? If it changed a little bit, could we detect it? Are we durable in the mechanism to which we're going and doing detection? Some of it's stuff that should be all right for scripting for execution. Okay, well, that's not too crazy. Let's think about the different ways to detect scripting for execution. Some of it is modifying the engineering workstations or modifying the logic on the controllers themselves. Okay, well, that's a little bit harder now. How do we get down into the plants? And I promise you that's going to take collaboration and cooperation with your plant operations and engineer staff. And my best recommendation for that is a case of cold drinks and a box of donuts. Go out to the substation or go out to the plant and say, hey, I'm here to learn. What can I do for you? Start engaging that other side of the house, because it is got to be a one-team thing if we're going to get ahead of these threats. The top ones that we've observed, the things that I really want to highlight, first up was those living off the land activities. Again, the hyper-focus on exploits, malware, and vulnerabilities is going to misguide you in trying to detect these threats. I also see a lot of organizations that really just want to apply some level of machine learning or baselining to the environment and say, this is good. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem is if you start whitelisting out communications that today were good, and we're not dealing with exploits and vulnerabilities but living on the land techniques, tomorrow those same good behaviors could be used maliciously by adversaries. So you won't see it. There's a couple of times this past year we did incident response cases where they had whitelisted out so many things that they didn't see the adversary at all. So we want to be careful with how we're approaching security in this space. Another one, persistent compromised accounts. I think that's a really good one because enterprise security worries about the same thing. So figuring out exactly how to get around identity access and figuring out who's accessing our environment is good. I'm not saying go deploy multi-factor authentication on everything. It's a great way to really tick off all the operators, maybe ease them into it. But maybe it's creating choke points in our environment where we say, look, we're going to have some connections come in, but at least we're going to be able to monitor them through a choke point. At least we're going to be able to see what's happening and get ahead of it. Another one, of course, is modifying that control logic itself. The detection of that is absolutely going to be in that east-west traffic down the plant. The response to it, though, again, is going to have to be with the operators to understand exactly what was changed and why that matters. A lot of incident response in ICS isn't going in and doing containment and eradication and recovery. I don't know any operators that's like, you go ahead and rebuild the HMI. Like, that's not happening. A lot of what it is understanding the root cause analysis and being able to advise the operations staff on here are your choices and here's what really happened, so they don't respond to it like it's a maintenance event when it's actually a cyber attack. The other thing that I thought was interesting, even though as we move on to the next slide, was the last bullet there about using multiple teams. We've seen this time and time again. You are not going up against one abstracted adversary. It's another reason I dislike the discussion of it's Iran, or it's Russia, or it's China, which might work for some of you. And again, I'm not here on stage to tell you how to live your life. But on the attribution side, you do not have some monolithic threat. You have teams that work together. You have countries that work together. You have countries that have private sector teams as well. The one team that develops the malware may not be the same team that uses the malware, may not be the same team that's setting up the infrastructure, may not be the same team that's choosing the targets. That makes everything blurry, but it also means a lot of proliferation of that tradecraft. So even when I go back and say, hey, defense is doable, why am I concerned? Why are we talking about this? Because the threats are going to learn from each other real quick, and we're already seeing it. One of the things we saw this past year was very clearly seeing that one of the teams that was going after industrial environments was not the same team getting access or developing capabilities, to the point that the team that used the capability in the industrial environment messed it up because they didn't fully understand how it worked. There wasn't good documentation on the adversary's code. And that's not to say don't do documentation either. You should definitely do documentation when you're coding. But they have that same problem on the adversary land. What about our most dangerous tactics? The most dangerous one, of course, was the safety system compromise. Well, it only happened in Saudi Arabia, right? Well, true, the safety system piece only happened in Saudi Arabia, but that threat that we track as Xenotime, we've since seen them across different GCC countries. We've seen them across Europe. We've seen them across Australia. We've seen them targeting not just oil and gas in the United States. We saw them go after and try to target about a dozen electric companies as well. So the same threat, the same team that tried to kill people at a petrochemical facility is now beginning that stage one against other places, other countries, other industries. So yeah, I do want you to know that safety system compromises is something you better pay attention to. Because it's also going to be in your incident response playbook discussion of going in to do incident response at a facility under attack with no safety system in play. That's now an unsafe environment. How are you going to deal with that in terms of your responders and actually how you're trying to operate in that facility in that situation? And you better be having business continuity and disaster recovery plans discussions with a cyber element. A lot of times we see companies that have an incident response plan that have a paragraph or ICS that says call. Go have those conversations ahead of time. The other thing we've seen is an increased use of ransomware. I think everybody's seen that. What we found interesting this past year is the first ICS-focused ransomware, Ekans. And so it was actually pulling in some understanding of ICS into the development of the malware and what it was doing. Early days. I'm not freaking out about that malware right now. Actually, in a lot of ways, it's probably really, really basic. But it's showing an intent by adversaries to specifically be looking into ICS as they think about ransomware. And now we're not just thinking about holding a bank hostage or holding some enterprise networks hostage, but trying to get to a point where they can hold an electric power site hostage or your manufacturing lines with a must deploy critical assets and must keep production up kind of environments. That's something that we really need to get ahead of. And then lastly on that, some of the ransomware cases we saw weren't really about the ransomware. I don't know why threats do this. Personally, I don't think it's really that smart, but who am I to judge the adversaries? Is they're going in and they're successfully doing intellectual property theft, then deploy ransomware at the end to kind of burn the bridges at the end. Now, I don't think that's super smart because it actually leaves behind a lot of forensic evidence and it just really points it out, but it's something that can occur. In one incident response case we did, it was a targeted threat that compromised a company, got into the industrial environments, did what they needed to do, but it was because they compromised that facility and kind of left the connectivity open that somebody else used it to deploy ransomware at the end. And so that first threat got compromised by not patching afterwards. Yeah, that's good. So by not cleaning up after themselves. So the other lessons learned from the incident response side that I hope you can take and use with you is 100% of the cases that we did incident response on, you could directly access the internet, the industrial control systems from the internet. Not all controls are good for everybody, but segmentation is one of those things we need to be careful of. There is no such thing as air gaps. Get over that. But we absolutely want to have some level of segmentation not to directly interact with industrial control systems from the internet. Another aspect is when we walked into our cases, 51% of the time that we got called in IR engagements, they handed us information to be helpful, and it was the wrong information. Their diagrams, their inventories, their understanding of their own facility was so far out of date that we stopped listening to folks because it was misleading the responders when they had to actually go and do their work. So it's slowing down incident response to have to go do all the things that you should be doing ahead of time. 0% of our incident response cases were benefited from any level of deployed visibility, monitoring, aggregated logging, or anything that was going to be helpful along those lines. 0%. There's something to go work on this next year. Whatever you're doing, trying to pull together the insights and the data into a central location, or monitoring, or logging, or some aspect to help in these cases. Again, yeah, I think detection deserves a lot of focus. I think we've over-focused on protection to the point that we never detect, so we never tune that protection. We never detect to get to incident response. I want you to focus on detection, but think about the incident response first. Because you can very quickly want to respond to an Xenotime safety system level compromise and go the other direction of let me deploy asset identification, then threat detection, and one day I'll get to response, and make the wrong choices. Instead, think about your response strategy first and work backwards. and go, if I'm going to get to this type of response, I need this type of detection. If I'm going to get this type of detection, here's the type of data I need. Don't try to collect it all and just hope it works out for you. Your analyst will drown in the data. The top access mechanisms for these cases and others. First one, very simple, remote services password spraying. Still a thing to be aware of, especially for all those VPNs. Also, remember, TeamViewer is not a VPN. Get real VPNs if you're going to do this in your industrial environments. Accidental malware infections absolutely still occur. In many cases, if you can detect the more sophisticated threats, you're going to be able to detect the accidental accidental malware. Some of the tactics overlay really nicely. The big one, though, is the shared network access. A lot of companies put so much focus, understandably, on segmentation at the enterprise level. Hey, we're going to keep them out of the OT or the ICS networks. They got to come through us first. Except that's not true. Your operations have direct access, very commonly, to your OEMs, your vendors, your suppliers, your integrators, your maintenance folks. And so they don't have to go through the IT networks to get to the plants. They've got access to those vendors, and those vendors are getting compromised, and people are abusing those accesses. We've responded to numerous cases doing that this past year. Please be careful of it. Get in the environment. Don't just get in the IT network and do a pen test or otherwise to get into the OT side. Get in the OT side and do it out. See if once inside the operations environment, can we get out? How would we get out? What are the access methods? Those are going to give you a better recommendation on actually what to go secure. And of course, quite a bit of ICS-themed watering holes. It makes so much sense. It seems really basic, but if you're going to go target a bunch of industrial environments, you're going to have two really big challenges immediately. One, getting on the ICS side itself, and two, getting out. We just talked about this, right? ICS-themed water holes are great because you're usually looking at ICS software that they're going and downloading already, so they're going immediately into the ICS, so you got a nice path in. And then we also see a lot of the VPN software still getting compromised, very similar to the Havex malware campaign from 2014, where if I'm on an ICS system that they're installing ICS VPNs, it's very likely it's got a connectivity connection out. So it's a really smart thing for an adversary to do, so I want you to get ahead of it. On the proactive side of the house, a lot of companies are being proactive, so that's kudos to them. Again, a lot of times we think that these ICS folks aren't doing anything. So many good folks are doing so much good work around the community. But 100% of the clients we went into, 100% that believed they had an air gap had multiple routes of communication. We have not found this mythical air gap. I don't think we're going to. Be careful on that, but multiple routes in. 76% weren't able to detect any of our red teams no matter how much we brought it down. We don't go in to say, hey, and no red team should go in to say, let's knock the doors down and make the blue team embarrassed. That's not the goal. The goal is, okay, well, at what level can you detect us, and then can we go beyond that so we can figure out where we need to take security? 76% of them, no matter how much we try to tailor it, were unsuccessful. They didn't have the right tooling, people, or process around what they were doing to be successful. 71% of our assessments, we were able to traverse into critical ICS networks directly from the IT side of the house. There's a lot of porous exchange between our networks. Please don't just over-focus on things like segmentation. The next one, though, is something that's not as relevant to all of you, but it's extremely relevant for our OEMs or our original equipment manufacturers, the big ICS vendors of the world. We found in our engagements that 91% of all of our clients had significant opportunities to do hardening on that equipment or the software or the systems themselves, and were blocked from doing so by the vendor. They wanted to do the right thing. They were trying to do security in their environments, but based on a misunderstanding of warranties or cultural gaps, they were blocked. So if you're an OEM in this space, I will challenge you for this next year that your takeaway of this presentation, your opportunity this next year, is to go figure out where the barriers are for your clients and figure out how to enable them to do some of the basic hardening things that will absolutely help us out. That is an easy way to get a real good win across the community. So what are our recommended controls from all these different insights as we start winding down the presentation? First and foremost, yeah, please go have an ICS-specific incident response, some level of plan. Test it out with a tabletop exercise. You want to talk about bringing culture together? Do a tabletop exercise with the IT security team first. Then, once you got your stuff together, do it again with the operations folks and figure out the things that you thought and see if they were still valid. See if the assumptions you made were good, if the POCs, the point of contacts you thought existed were the right ones. Time and time again, we see teams learn entirely new things about their facilities, operations, and people just by getting in a room with an inject and talking about it. Don't make it silly, make it something real. Use one of the scenarios that we're talking about. Use that as the scenario. Because another good way to lose operations is to be like, yeah, and they came in with like lasers from space, and then no. Keep it real and keep it focused on what actually can happen in the industrial environment. Yeah, please get around the ICS-specific visibility and threat detection piece. Don't just hyper-focus on anomalies or indicators. Start looking at those behaviors that we as a community are learning about, those tactics. Go look at those MITRE ATT&CK ICS use cases and figure out, how am I going to do this? Multi-factor authentication. It's an easy control to recommend, but here's how you do it in an ICS environment. First and foremost, I do not want my MFA to be requiring the cloud. I'm not cloud apprehensive at all. I do think there's a lot of cloud-driven stuff that can actually provide a lot of security in our environments. But I don't want the multi-factor authentication to require cloud connectivity, because when we're dealing with industrial operations and industrial environments, it's very common that we'll lose that access or need to lose that access. So having something that we can manage and do on-prem for at least that control makes a lot of sense. The same thing when we start looking at MFA, it might not be all of our connections. Remember what I said earlier, have a choke point, have an opportunity to monitor that. But maybe my remote maintenance personnel that are agreeing to come into my facility, that I don't have good SLAs with, that I don't really know how to get ahead of their problems, and maybe they're going to get compromised, maybe I require them to have multi-factor authentication. Or not all of my industrial environment, but maybe my networks that are going to the safety system. We say that's so critical that we're going to treat it just a little bit different. Have that kind of discussion. And then lastly, of course, yes, vulnerabilities, but please take a risk-based approach. I see so many teams waste so many resources building this giant vulnerability management program to go and identify and think about all the vulnerabilities, to not patch them or to patch all the ones that are useless. For many of the people that we look at, if their patch policy or their patch rate is above 36%, they're largely wasting resources because they're going and patching the wrong things. So again, not don't patch, but please be thoughtful in doing it and realizing that that's not the big problem we see today. So how do you use this after the conference? All right, first week, you're gonna go back and you're gonna detox. You're gonna be like, hey, I didn't get coronavirus, yay me. That's good, all right? Then you're gonna sleep it off, you're gonna catch up on some emails, that's good. But I want you to get right back to work, because this always happens. You go to a conference, you talk to the peers, it's like a therapy session, we feel good, and then you don't apply it. So in the first week back after you detox, 7 to 30 days, I want you to pick out 3 to 5 of those scenarios. I want you to use intel and consequence-driven. So in other words, take like 2 scenarios that we talked about from an intel perspective. If you're an electric utility, great example, and you're preparing for what happens if China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea all team up on us at once, but you didn't cover Ukraine 2015 and 2016 scenarios, that's a problem. So go take the things that we know about, the things that were ground truth reality, go pick 2 scenarios that are intel-driven, then pick 1 or 2 by talking with your plant folks and figuring out consequence-driven. What can go wrong regardless of what the threats are doing? I routinely walk into plants, find the oldest, crustiest looking engineer I can. I'm like, hey man, what would be a bad day for you? Oh man, that turbine over there, if that goes out of control, woo, run. Thank you. Now that is a consequence-driven scenario. So I'm gonna go figure out what was the cyber component of that so we can get ahead of it. So go pick out 3 to 5 of those. You probably will not be able to do more than 5. So pick 3 to 5, set realistic goals. Then, out of those, map what you already have. You probably already have some levels of controls. What did you already invest in that's relevant? A lot of companies will buy a product and not even deploy it fully. Figure out what you've already made investments into that can tell your story and where your gaps are. And specifically, again, think about it from response to detection to collection, not going the other way. Once you figure those out, go and do a tabletop exercise about it. So about the 2-month point, I want some level of internal tabletop exercise. Just a chat, doesn't have to be anything too big. From there, I want you to take that tabletop exercise, pick 4 or 5 controls. Please do not develop this multi-year roadmap with 50, 30, 40, 50 controls. You're not gonna get done with it. It's not gonna happen. And it's not also gonna happen at the time and the rate you want it to in industrial. Pick up to 5 things. Segmentation, monitoring and visibility, an incident response plan, some level of key vulnerability analysis. Whatever it's gonna be, pick a couple controls off of what would apply for those tabletop exercises. Then, from 120 to 180 days, 90 to 180 days, it's really about actioning it. So the 90 to 120 day period, do an assessment yourself. Don't call in the firms like mine unless you have to. Go do your own thing first. Get in your environments, learn your people, try to do a self-assessment. You always want to bring in outside expertise later because you can validate or invalidate and break things like groupthink, because we got a lot of bias in our field. But we can do it ourselves for the first couple. Then, that 120 to 180 day period, figure out what the actual people, process, and technology piece of this is going to look like, because that's going to be important. Now it's going to be an informed strategy tailored to you and your threat landscape instead of just general controls up on a stage. So hopefully, through this presentation, give you some things to think about, some ways to approach it, some key tactics and techniques to look at, some key challenges we saw over the last year. But I'll remind you, you can do this. Our community is worth doing. It's worth getting right. Our infrastructure, our people, our community depend upon it. It's not about just protecting the database, it's about protecting our people. And you are empowered to do so. If you need to get started, and if nowhere else to get started, I have a blog that I wrote with just free resources. Just packet captures, YouTube videos, white papers. It's actually pretty selfish. I get all these people that come up to me, wonderful people like you, they come up and go, Rob, I loved everything. How do you get started? And I got so tired of answering the question, I just wrote a blog. So there you go. There's your blog. That's how you get started. The next step after that, go figure out your local infrastructure community. If you want to get into this field, every utility, mining company, oil and gas company, all of them I know, they're hiring. Go talk to them. They'll take care of you. Take a box of donuts. You'll get it right. We'll get it right together. Thank you so much.